This is part 2 of last week's podcast.
You know, if there's anything I want to be remembered for, it's that I helped people get serious about training, that I helped people realize that training is needed. It's cool. It's something, sexy, if you will, as a guy, that like, oh wow, I need to go out there and do this. It's high speed is the phrase I'm looking for, because so many guys go Wyatt Earp Club style. I've got my gun, my wife's a nurse, we're good to go.
Welcome to CV Ministries Church Security Through Prevention podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Blevins. My guest this week is Paul Buckner. Paul might be familiar to some as he is one of 3 that make up the church safety guys. And he has some other passions for ministry that are fantastic, and we'll cover many of those today. We cover so much ground in this podcast that is easily going to have to be 2. And as you'll hear, we could have taken any of the topics that we covered and made standalone podcasts out of them. If there was a topic that we covered or mentioned and you would like to hear more about it, let me know and I'll see what we can do. Also, I continue to need your feedback on topics and guests. Some of you have sent me some great guest ideas, and not all of them have worked out, but that does not mean that I don't value or continue to need ideas. I still want to encourage you to do a Google review, as that continues to help us. We have added MeWe to our social media platforms this week and would invite you to join the CV Ministries page on MeWe. We haven't removed our Facebook CV Ministries page, but have just added another location. As always, like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. All right, let's get going and talk with Paul Buckner on a variety of topics. Yeah, it's a tough one. It's a tough one for a lot of ministries and a lot of ministry leaders to kind of overcome that. But I love what Jimmy Meeks says, and Colonel Grossman says it too. It's one day we want to get to heaven, and you can come up to me and say, thanks for nothing. All the training that you went to, all the, if you spent money on training or otherwise, or, I tell people that at our seminars, I'll be happy if you come up to me and say, thanks for nothing. Because you were at least prepared, whether you needed to use it or not, at least you were prepared to do it. And that's the key, is just being prepared.
Amen. I had shared a story with you before a few days ago when we were talking on the phone about probably one of the most alarming conversations I had about church safety. And this is what I really want people to understand about training. If I can be the guy that's riding through town, Paul Revere style, and saying, the redcoats are coming, you need to get training, then the guys like you can come in behind and can do the training, because I'm a lifelong student. That's one of the things I love about your podcast is you say, I'll never say I've arrived. And if I can help people to understand that they need to train and the importance of training before I leave this earth, I've baptized people. I love the ministries I have. If there's a physical ministry that I can be involved in that I get remembered for, I want to be known for helping people to go, oh crud, I need to go train. And I do it with police officers. I put them next to competitive shooters that can shoot circles around them on purpose, and then have that police officer come up to me and go, Paul, that guy had a bullet in the target drawing from concealment before I cleared my duty holster. And I'm like, amen. And they're like, that was scary. And I'm like, right. So now we know what we're training for, right? To train to what level? And they're like, you're darn right. Well, that needs to find its way into church security teams, where people go, they stop going, I'm Wyatt Earp, and start going, wow, that was humbling. And to your point, a lot of people, even especially right now with COVID, they don't want to go train. It's hard to get people to stop looking at church security or safety as a hobby and start looking at it as a calling. And to go to that story, in a nutshell, I had a conversation with a guy that explained to me that he carried a 5-shot snub-nose revolver the way his grandfather taught him. Now, this guy was about 70. He had 3 rounds in the revolver and had the revolver rotated with no backup, no speed loader, no loose rounds in his pocket, no loader strip, 3 rounds in a snubby, hammerless, so monstrous trigger pull, and had it rotated to where he would have to pull the trigger 3 times for it to fire. And he was his church's only security component. He was the heavy hitter. And I about had a Tourette's episode when he explained to me that he was going to somehow, with no practice, and no training and no experience of any kind, he was going to stop the threat.
Right. Yeah. And this is really why, you guys do what you do with the church safety guys. We do what we do with our seminars, to where we want to, when we're out doing our seminars, we want to wet people's whistle. We tell them we're not
Amen.
going to be able to solve everything. There's not enough time for us to cover everything. But what we want to do is to wet your whistle, to show you what training can be like, and maybe give you
Amen.
some ideas on how to do it better with what you have. A lot of the questions we get at our seminars, on breaks and different things, is like, well, we don't have this, or we don't have this, or we don't have this. Okay, well, let's don't focus on what you don't have. Let's take a look at what resources you do have, or what churches can you partner in the area with and do training with them. It just makes for a safer community anyway, if you're all on the same page.
See, and that's one thing I love about what you do, is because James and I have pushed this for a long time, and Mike has come in alongside it and championed it. We want to see people at megachurches that have pretty good high speed, safety teams sponsor events, bring people in like you. And there are some great people that do what you do and do seminars, and actually, now you need a safety team, and you've got radios and you've got people in the parking lot. How do we make it practical? And then cross-train to the point that when your church does a vacation Bible school and needs all hands on deck, you can actually borrow resources from another church or another campus and utilize those. And a lot of insurance companies are okay with that. I've had people go, "Oh, we would never do that because our insurance company would freak out." Have you called them? Because a lot of the policies I've seen, and I am not an expert, they're actually written so that whoever's in your church at that time is covered. Now, again, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an insurance agent. I don't know your state's laws. But yes, cross-train with other churches. Go watch other churches and how they do things. I've learned more from watching other churches. And then I've learned this question: what do you think I should know that I don't even know to ask you? And then you'll tell me about the time that you had a mess up, or the thing you learned the hard way. Ooh, now I don't have to learn that the hard way. Yeah, cross-train.
Right. Yep, absolutely. So tell us a little bit about the church safety guys. I know we've referenced them a couple times, that you're a part of. You've got a huge footprint on social media. I've moved over CV Ministries over to MeWe, and you guys are there as well and have been for a few years. So kind of talk a little bit about who you guys are and what you do, and because I really want to encourage people to get plugged in to the forum, to hearing your Sunday night broadcast, because it's another great resource to be able to use with your teams. Or I actually had a guy ask me today, "Is it okay if I share your podcast?" Yeah, it's really okay, because that's really what it's for, is how many people, I want to equip and educate and entertain as many people as we can, to let them know that, this is a great ministry. We can have fun with it. We can, and how do we do it well? How can we equip you to help you do it well? So tell us a little bit about the church safety guys.
So James McGarvey started a group on Facebook called Church Safety and Security several years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. And his thing was that a lot of smaller churches didn't have the budget to go out there and get a lot of high-speed training. And when he and I had started, much like yourself, in church safety and security, a lot of the books weren't out there. And so we were those pioneers headed west for Oregon in the wagons, and drowning in the rivers and dying of dysentery. We were all trying to figure this stuff out and blundering around. And then over time we built relationships with other churches and whatever. So his goal was, how can we get the meat and potatoes of church safety, not the theory, but the meat and potatoes? How can we get it directly to the people that need it? And so he started the group, and he refused to allow the drama that some other groups are known for. And I loved that. And so I kind of stumbled into it. I had started my own little church safety group for my team and for my area. And we were giving each other alerts about people that were agitators, potential pedophiles trying to come on campus, whatever. And so we had an alerts page, an alerts group. And people started asking me questions. I started answering questions in video form. I stumbled across James's page. We started doing videos talking to each other in each other's groups. And I was like, hey, come over to my group and start posting some of your content. And then he said, hey, would you join me? So it started from, how do we give people practical stuff and then point them to the kind of training that they need? Because, when you don't know what you don't know, you're in trouble. Well, then God kept growing it. And we are either the largest Facebook group or close. And he keeps it very structured, which is awesome. And it's a great place for streamlined news, and we have a lot of fun and we joke. I mean, I'm kind of a nut at heart, but we don't take ourselves too seriously, and we're not afraid to pick on each other. And we're also not afraid to say, I learned a better way to do this. And so maybe the way that I talked about it 2 years ago, maybe there's a better way. And we're also not going to dictate and say, well, I'm just going to tell you, Dan, there's only one way to do this, and this is this particular style. Well, there's as many ways to do church safety as there are people. And maybe the way that it works in my church would not work in your church at all. And your needs may be completely different. So that's where that came from. And now we're on different social media platforms, and God has blessed us, which I'm unbelievably humbled by. He's blessed us. We've got books. We've been asked to go to events. We've received free training from people that are like, hey, you tell people if I have the bona fides to teach this. And so we've gone out to training and sat there, drooling and taking notes. And so people are starting to look to us as almost like the Yelp of church safety, which is really cool. I really like that. And, that ministry first focus to me couldn't be, I don't know of a better way to do it. And so to land that, that is probably the coolest aspect of it, is the friendships that God has brought to the table. And we've got to have heart-to-heart real conversations with Frank Pomeroy and Stephen Williford. And I've got to ask people who I admire questions like a Frank Pomeroy. What would you say to the people who say, well, I got a gun and my wife's a nurse, we got this thing on lockdown? And then hear him explain why actual trained church safety matters from a guy who could literally write the book. And, again, if I could be remembered for something, it's hopefully for waking people up to go, oh, there's so much more than having a radio and a gun. So I think that if we could encapsulate the church safety guys, that's us.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm, and that, I've heard you reference that before, the Yelp of church safety and security. It really is. I mean, it's a great place for people to ask questions, to get feedback, to find resources that are out there, and just great discussions. And then a lot of different news things as well that's applicable to what we're doing. So people can say, okay, these are kind of the trends that are out there. Every month I put church incidents, things that have happened in the church. It could be a variety of things from vandalism to shootings and everything in between. A lot of sex crimes going on in the churches, and that it always has been, but it's coming out more and more now, much more visible. So, every month I put that on our Facebook page, and I put it out in the monthly newsletter as well. And it's just absolutely amazing what's going on, and how many people don't realize what's going on every week in churches around the country. They might say, well, no, nothing ever really happens, because nothing's being covered in the news. Well, no, it really is happening. And I get alerts every day about what's happening in churches around the country. So it's, what you guys are doing, I just encourage people to get plugged into groups, like your guys's, with the church safety guys, with the Faith-Based Security Network as well. Who become a member of the Faith-Based Security Network, to where you can be part of the forum within that, and then they've got a new presence on Facebook as well. In that, but these resources don't have to take a lot of time. You can just look and see, is it applicable to me? Is it not? Does it just give me information? Great. I've got information. Maybe it's information that might be a great conversation with another church in your community about, hey, you know what? I just noticed this is what's kind of happening in our area, or this is what's kind of nationally what we're seeing trend wise to be aware of.
Yep. Yeah, it's alarming to me when I have a conversation with a pastor. I'll be doing a walkthrough at a church with a friend or an acquaintance who's like, "Hey, what day 2 weeks from now could you come by my church and do a walkthrough with me?" And I've talked about executive protection site surveys and looking at the door that could be jimmied or there's no light here or whatever. And when you're used to seeing the same terrain all the time, you become numb to it.
Right.
Well, I'll be doing that walkthrough with somebody, and one of their pastors will be like, "We really appreciate what you guys do. And I mean, we have a safety team because it makes people feel better, but we really don't see the need for it." And it's almost like you guys are playing security. And I know that people who are very serious about doing church safety right, that one just about sets your teeth on edge. And it's a matter of not knowing what people don't know. And we serve humbly at the pleasure of our leadership. And I talked to one of our pastors about adding bollards to a specific spot in case somebody tried to do either a vehicle-borne attack or the much, much more likelihood of an elderly driver who forgets which pedal's which. And the reply I got was, "Well, I mean, that's a good idea, but I mean, what are the odds?" And I said, "Well, I can start sending you the links to the articles about people running into churches. It's almost every day in the US that a church gets hit by a vehicle." And he looked at me and he's like, "Really?" And I'm like, dead serious. He's like, "Wow, I wouldn't have known that." Well, of course we're not going to know that because, like you said, you've got RSS feeds that you subscribe to or similar where because you're looking for it. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I've had that bollard conversation with other churches too. And that they have a hard time convincing their leadership of it. They see what's happening, and it's really, there's some very inexpensive, creative ways to do it at a church if your church is vulnerable for that. A lot of churches nowadays are pretty much being constructed in such a way with that in mind, with that security component in mind, which is good as well, to where it makes it much harder to just drive a vehicle straight in.
Yeah. Yeah, I did a walkthrough at a church that was very concerned about a vehicle-borne potential attack. And I said, "Well, your front entrance is 6-7 feet off the ground with a set of steps. The entire front of your church might as well be a medieval fortress. It's stone and it's concrete and it's 16-foot thick concrete walls. The front of your church is not vulnerable to anything this side of an Abrams." And they were like, "Oh, okay, cool." Because it's not. I mean, if you manage to get in the front doors of that church with a vehicle, you were probably flying.
So what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about your podcast that you've started and and your ministry with your local law enforcement as far as being a chaplain. We have several chaplains in our church that are associated with the police department. We've got one or two that are part of our security team as well, which gives a great ministry aspect, just adds to that ministry component within our security team. As we've had different community groups and small groups of men get together to study God's word, to have that chaplain, those guys there just kind of, I think, encourages that as well. That ministry piece even more so within our teams. But so let's talk a little bit about you. You have a new podcast out there. So tell us a little bit about Beside the Badge, and then and what God's got you doing now.
So I've been a chaplain actually longer than I have been involved with the church safety guys, and it's always been something that I kind of did in the background. It was riding along in a car, ministering one-on-one. And I had the opportunity to start a podcast, and I've listened to a lot of high quality podcasts, many of which are life changing. I've backed them up and listened to the same section again. And it dawned on me one day after helping a couple of friends prepare to start their own podcast that wait, I could do this myself. And I had never thought of it that way. And I went, the same amount of energy that I put into sitting in a car next to a young police officer and riding for 4 hours, or, the shortest ride I've ever had was 5 minutes, and the longest one I've ever had was over 10 hours. And so I love that ministry. Well, it takes me out of the seat next to them into a recording studio, And I can say the exact same things and talk about the same experiences and maybe touch dozens or hundreds or maybe, God willing, thousands of lives over time. So, if someone knows a police officer, or if they're Blue family and they want to understand what officers face on a near day-to-day basis, I think Beside the Badge might be for them. And it's really a neat experience because I can detach a story from the officer it happened to, which I've been doing for 10 years. And I can talk about the good and the bad and the ugly of things people face, focused on God. And I've had police officers bless me by calling me and saying, "Listen, the other day when you and I talked, you didn't know it, but I'd written my resignation letter. I was actually going to leave law enforcement, and you really helped me to wrap my mind around what I was dealing with and realize that would have been a mistake, and realize there's a better way to cope." And so I joke that I don't chaplain and tell. And so a lot of officers can tell me their stories and know that I'm not gonna go talk about them.
We just want to take a quick break here to let you know how to contact us and where to find out more about our national seminar. I see communities that may know why church security is important, but they may not be doing anything about it or don't know how to do it well. Our national seminars are for ushers, greeters, children's workers, staff, volunteers, your security teams, and other ministries in your community. We say that this is a level 1 training that is designed to help equip you to serve well in your various ministries while maintaining a safe place for people to come. Getting churches on the same or similar page when it comes to security will only make the community safer as well. The easiest way to find out more information or to contact us is to go to cv-ministries.com. There you'll find a variety of training DVDs and books, with more being developed all the time. There's also a place at the bottom of the page where you can sign up for our monthly newsletter and to be able to get more information. We would love your feedback on topics or guests that you would like to hear on future podcasts. Okay, now that we have that out of the way, let's get back to the podcast.
And I have seen amazing things happen. I've been to their funerals. I've been to their weddings. I've been there when the kids were born. I've helped them move. And on occasions, I've literally fought physically to protect officers that were isolated from backup. And now I can take a lot of those experiences that I'm very passionate about, and I can share them from a recording just like this one. And an officer that I'll never meet face to face this side of heaven can maybe be blessed by that broadcast at 2:00 in the morning, 5 years after I recorded. So that's what made me want to start Beside the Badge. And I feel like I have a book in me ultimately called Beside the Badge, which is why I named the podcast that. And I tell people I've spent over 10 years beside the badge. Simon Osimo, I think you know him, Dan. He's a friend, and he encouraged me to name not only my book that, but my podcast that. And he has his own podcast, Who I Became. And so that's where that's come from. As of today, I think there's 19 or 20 episodes out there. And we talk about all kinds of things, about priorities, about not taking stress home. And ultimately, I'm going to start bringing subject matter experts in to talk about certain things, about what the impacts are of being an officer, maybe how to do certain things better, resources and ways to get equipment or whatever, even for departments, because a lot of these departments in the the central United States, they're just broke. So there's a very practical need in some cases. So I think if I could somehow encapsulate Beside the Badge, that's what it is.
Yeah, I think it's a great ministry to our law enforcement really need ministry to come alongside them, to have that support and know that they're supported. Our church has done a lot of great things, even during this COVID time when we're not having our services like we normally would. We don't have the extra duty like we normally would, but yet we want them to know that they're still thought about, prayed for, and cared about in many ways. And they love it. My wife actually has run into several of them. She went to I was out of town, so I couldn't go, but a memorial for an officer that had a motorcycle accident and died earlier this year, right at the beginning of COVID. And we just, he was a friend. He was an officer that was called our church, his church. because it's where he wanted his extra duty to go. And so my wife sees these guys far more often than I do just because of her role at the church. But they still love the community and the coming alongside. I've worked with other churches where they might have extra duty law enforcement that come and work at their church, to where the officers are like, I don't ever want to go back there again.
Right.
Yeah, they're like, I was told to go stand in a corner down this hallway, and that's, that they'll handle everything else. And we're firm believers in treating them just like family. You need
Amen.
water. Here's our room. We have a fridge. We have water. We have snacks. Can I get you anything? The coffee shop we have a coffee shop in our church. You know what? Go get anything you want. It's on us. That kind of thing. I mean, and my wife bakes goods for them. I mean, that's really what they look for. They won't eat the store bought stuff. They'll eat the baked stuff that she's brought every week. It's just kind of funny. So, I mean, it's just building that relationship and that camaraderie. And it's strengthening the community. It's strengthening our relationship with law enforcement in our community. Because I've told churches, I said, the law enforcement will come out of the woodwork faster than you can imagine if something were happening at your church. Yep. So what are you doing to love on those guys? They're loving on our community. So what are you doing to love on those guys and ministering to them?
Yeah. So you just hit one of the things I'm most passionate about. And I mean, again, talking about things that could be an entire episode, to try to succinctly tie all that together. Yeah. The police officers can lose their faith in humanity. I've talked to police officers that have worked at night for 5 years. They look like vampires because they don't ever see sunlight. Or they rarely see sunlight, and because they got pulled into a court case in the middle of the day, and they deal with the 2% of society that's insane. And so I've been with officers that are like, yeah, if I didn't arrest the same 15 people, I wouldn't have a job. And they well and truly are losing their faith in humanity, and they then go home, and it's like they go to war on their shift, and they come home. And all day long, all shift long, whatever, they dealt with non-custodial parent issues, somebody who was molesting their kid, parents that were beating on each other, somebody tried to stab them, someone urinated on them during their shift. I dealt with a police officer recently that had somebody throw their own feces at him. And these are the things that police officers see. And then they come home to their family, and their spouse, their loved ones are complaining about normal day-to-day life problems. And their kid's like, Dad, I want an iPhone. Mom, I want a new whatever. And it's hard for them not to go, please stop talking. You don't have a clue how good you have it. And of course, positive coping mechanisms are, I go to work and do what I do so that you can have that normal life. And you're blessed beyond what you know, but I still want to hear about your day, because these are the stresses that normal people hear and listen to and deal with. And I've had great career law enforcement tell me how they cope with things like sitting out in the car that they drive home because it's their issued vehicle. And they sit there in the vehicle and they tell their family, if I sit in the driveway and I don't immediately jump out of the vehicle to come in, I've had a bad day. So let me sit there and decompress. And so I can take those coping mechanisms, i.e. like the guy sits in his car and he goes, today I saw this terrible thing happen, and I saw the inside of a human head of an 8-year-old child. Like, I mean, these things happen. And then I've got to go home and I have a 9-year-old kid and not let that bother me. So I can either bury it and have to deal with it later, or I can let it go. And I've had great conversations with officers who are believers and not. One of the officers that I recently visited with is an avowed atheist who is finding some hope in the things we talked about. So all of those things are the really, 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 really awful things that police officers see. And the only time that they have contact with quote unquote Christians, if they're not a believer already, is when they go to a house and there's crosses all over the walls and there's decorative Bibles out and the people are throwing tables and chairs at each other and screaming. And they're going, ugh, this Jesus thing ain't working for you guys. And I've had those conversations with police officers. So my heart is, yes, let's feed them. When we have our potluck dinners, let's feed them. Let's bring them in. Let's offer them coffee and snacks. Let's offer them a place to go to the bathroom. The average police officer has to take all these belt keepers off and remove their belt and remove their vest. It's about 26 pounds of gear, assuming that they have a belt rig and not a chest rig. And it's very hard to get all that off in a quiet, safe environment where they can go to the bathroom, knowing that they can pull into your parking lot and do a report. Excuse me, knowing that they can do all of these things at your church and they're welcome. And it took me the better part of 10 years to get my last church to where they didn't freak out when they saw a police officer walk in the door in uniform. And the church that God has called us to now, they do like these hero days where they, community hero type outreaches, and they bring in first responders and they shake their hands and thank them. And they have special, contests and things. And we have a growing number of first responders in our community who call my church home. And if we aren't loving on them, and we aren't giving them hope, and we aren't giving them a reason and a way to cope with things, they're not going to stay. They're going to go find a more lucrative job because it's way easier to make money doing something else, and no one's trying to kill you. And if we don't keep the good ones, we're in a world of hurt. So yes, I'm extremely passionate about that. And the fact that you guys are doing this in your church blesses my heart, because a lot of times churches have no ministry that's aimed towards law enforcement or anything. And the blessing that comes back is immeasurable. I've literally had guys walk up to me, motion me to the side, and say, that guy committed assault on somebody about a week ago and got mad because the guy said something that he didn't like. And so he walked over and pepper sprayed the guy in the face. And I'm like, really? And so it gives me an inside track on things that are going on. And I've actually seen the chief of a town who went to church with me, who became friends with a guy who he had chased for years because the guy was a drug dealer. The guy gave his life to the Lord, and the Christian chief and the former criminal were buddies. And they didn't go out to lunch together, but they were socially buddies. They went to church together. If that's not grace and forgiveness, I don't know what is.
Right. Yeah. And that's the gospel being lived out.
Amen. Amen. Well said.
Something that we often encourage churches to do, and a lot of it's for the safety of the officers, particularly in today's day and age. But we actually have a building that we changed the lock on to where it's a keypad, and the officers have the code. They can go in. It has Wi-Fi access. It has a refrigerator with food, with water. It has snacks. It has coffee that they can go in at night and do their reports and get out of their car. It has a TV if they want to turn on, the news, whatever the antenna is going to get. We don't have cable, but, at least, just to get away a little bit and not sit in their car. Sitting in his car in a parking lot isn't exactly safe as it once was.
Yeah.
But then it puts a law enforcement car in our parking lot at night that gives that visual that, well, I don't want to go mess with this place. And we're providing that safe environment for them to decompress, to do some of that decompressing that you were talking about. Just stepping out of the car into a different environment is mentally helpful for them in that. So it's your local law enforcement is blessed beyond measure to have access to that. And I'll tell you two quick stories about the things that police officers see and how that can, and then the second story is about how having officers at church blessed us. The first one is a police officer tells me the story. He and his partner for that shift were at a car accident as law enforcement, and the coroner was there. And let's say that they were collecting what used to be a human being pieces and putting it in a bag. And they hand it to the coroner and they leave, and they're standing at a set of gas pumps. And so their vehicles are pulled in facing each other. They're at the pumps fueling up, trying to decide if they're going to manage to not throw up. And they're like, so do we eat? I mean, I just put a finger in a bag. And that's the kind of stuff that people don't like to talk about that law enforcement see and deal with.
And I've had people talk about slipping in bodily fluids and falling and having it all over them because they were running up to try to save somebody in an accident and realizing this used to be inside somebody's head. That's the kind of thing that they're like, I don't want to talk about that. Well, that's real. That's real. And you have to figure out a way not to take that home. And so as they're standing at the gas pumps, I kid you not, guy pulls up in a pickup truck and he goes, is all you guys do is stand around? All I ever see you guys do is stand around and drives off. And they're looking at each other like, breathe, because they're thinking, dude, you have no idea. And so that's the ugly of what people can deal with. And unlike a 9-to-5 job that the average person has, you're not guaranteed a break as a police officer. And so your local law enforcement is blessed beyond measure. And if I could encourage churches that listen to this to adopt a similar stance, your church is very well protected with a cruiser in the parking lot. It does help. Now, right now, you might get some attention that you don't want because somebody that doesn't like cops might target one. It's a mixed bag. But on the whole, you're safer. So to the second story, we had a banquet at our church for law enforcement, and they asked me as a chaplain to set it up at my church to this is my last church, and to pray as the banquet began. Well, 5 or 6 officers stepped out at one point as the banquet was kind of drawing to a close to smoke a cigarette. And there's a bunch of officers inside. There's a bunch of vehicles in the parking lot. And there was a local guy who has a very severe drug problem. We've ministered to this guy. So this guy, as all these officers step outside to smoke a cigarette, and they're out there on this landing, parking lot's full of cop cars and what have you. It's late at night. Gentleman goes walking by who's been a local problem. He's got a severe drug issue. He has broken into the church multiple times and stolen stuff. We've had a lot of problems with him and tried our best to minister to him. Well, as he goes walking by the parking lot, he looks up and sees about 6 police officers smoking cigarettes on the balcony, and he starts crabbing, like sideways, moving as he's going. It was really funny to watch him. He completely freaked out because he looked up and saw all these uniformed police officers watching him, silhouetted against the light, and he's freaking out. And they all take a puff off their cigarettes and smile, and one of them goes, "Sup," as the guy walks by, and you can tell the guy's like, "That's a cop church." Guess what we didn't have anymore? Him breaking in. It scared him. He didn't want to be ministered to. He didn't want God, but he stopped breaking into our church. And so that is one of many blessings from having law enforcement around your church building.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as we wrap up, there's something I made a note of as we were talking, and then it just came back up again. You talked about the officers at the pumps, and just like, okay, we just got to breathe, not take it personally. I cover a lot of that in verbal de-escalation, but that you don't take personal assaults personally because they don't know you. The other thing that was when you were talking about the large guy that came out of the auditorium, and you described very well what his complexion was like, what you could see in his breathing, and so on, his reaction. This doesn't come automatically for people. It does take this is part of that part of training as well, is learning how to read people, learning how to react properly to people. One of the best resources out there for that of how people are going to react. How can you tell? How can you combat, let's say tunnel vision yourself in a situation? But Colonel Grossman's book on combat does that a lot. He really studies that, what our body's going to do in a combat situation. Doesn't matter how minor it might be. It might just be verbal. But what is our body going to do? What can we recognize in somebody else? I'm a firm believer that, it's not just the physical training, but it's the mental training, it's the spiritual training as well that we need to do. And I really appreciate all that you're doing in those you and the church safety guys as a whole, but to look at that and say, okay, what can we do? What can we provide? How can we best equip people to serve in their ministries, in a way that God intended us to do it? And I thank you for coming on today And and I know we covered a lot of ground in the time that we've had, which has been great because it's and you're right. We could take any one of these subjects and go off in multiple different ways. And I guess if we get feedback in one way or another, then maybe we will. Take a look at something a little bit deeper. If somebody wants to go a little bit deeper into one of these subjects, we certainly can.
Oh, I'd love that.
In that, but I sure appreciate your time, taking your time today to do this.
I have enjoyed every minute of it. And I was telling you offline, the old saying, long time listener, first time caller. I actively listen to your podcast. It's something that every time it pops up with a fresh episode, I've listened to it probably within the first 24 to 48 hours that it's out there, because I learn from it. And I think that's, like you say, you'll never say that you've arrived. I'll always learn something new. And there's giant gaping holes in what I know. And so I'm always looking for people that can teach me. And I get a lot out of your podcast. So yeah, I'm a 2 thumbs up guy when it comes to your podcast.
Oh, I appreciate it. Yeah, I'm glad. I'm glad it's. I've talked about this before, and you and I've talked about this. Even with the church safety guys, is that none of us ever thought we would be where we are today. None of us would ever thought that that God would be using us in this way to reach people in a variety of different ways, and it is very humbling when you think about how God is using us.
Amen.
Well, sir, again, thank you very much, and I'm sure this won't be the last one.
No, I have no doubt we'll talk again. At some point, I'll have to have you on my podcast, and we will definitely have you back on the Church Safety Guys. I guarantee you'll be back with our broadcast.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for taking time to listen to this podcast. If you really enjoyed it and you found it of benefit to you, we really appreciate your feedback. There's several different ways that you can provide us feedback. One of them is to subscribe to the podcast, is to share it with others, and another is to contact us directly, particularly if you have any questions or concerns, or you want more information on how to host a seminar in your community. You can contact me directly at danielblevins@cv@heart.com, or you can go to our website, that's cv-ministries.com. Both of those will get you in the right direction. Until next time, make sure that you're out there protecting the flock with a heart of service.